Humanity is enslaved. I am a slave, at least in relative terms, to archonic demonic beings that harvest, nourish, and feed on our emotional suffering. This whole world is a suffering machine. It's a hamster wheel of suffering. It is perpetual suffering. For multiple lifetimes, you are brought back here every single time to keep on suffering some more, to fuel this system. You are simply a battery that can be recharged by rebooting it and putting it back in its slot. That is what you are as a human being. But you are so much more. Because when we explore Gnostic and Kafir teachings, when we even look at Buddhist teachings and Christian mysticism in general, what we find is that yes, this whole reality is a refraction of the true essence. This world is refracted because, at least in Gnostic terms, Yaldabaoth, which originated from the true source, was created in error, in mistake, in ignorance of its own source, of its own inner recognition. So this split of identity, of thinking oneself separate, is the culprit for existence itself. Existence means to stand apart. So that implies separation by very definition. And Yaldabaoth, this false creator god, manifested various beings and dimensional realms in which this is one that we live in. And of course, a being created in ignorance of its own source, of its own true sustenance, will create a split reality, such as this, a dualistic realm, of course. And once you have subject-object in opposition to one another, once you have experience at all implied in duality, there will be suffering. There will be suffering because there is this split in experience. But once again, that is all in relative terms. Because the finite does not have independent existence. The finite cannot exist in the face of the infinite. And so you may then ask, which is more true, the infinite or the finite? Well, of course, there can only be the infinite, because that encompasses all possible realities in that. And so the finite cannot displace the infinite. The finite is simply a refractory illusion. It's an optical, full-on sensory illusion, if you will. This reality, that is. And everything that is contained within this worldly experience, this manifestation as a human being, it is part of this illusion, this game. But even though the movie on the screen isn't real, so to speak, it still has a reality, namely the screen. The screen itself, the substratum of existence, the underlying principle of all that is, which is prior to this false creator God, prior to these demonic suffering harvesting beings, prior to that, but also found in that. But what you are prior to that, the screen, is not affected by the movie. It's not affected by the contents of this experience. And so it really comes down to what you consider yourself to be. Because in true terms, really, you are not influenced by anything, by any being. Nobody has the power over you. There is no thing that can impact the no-thingness of your being, the essence of your being, the divine spark that you are. And so it is our own forgetfulness, our own ignorance, which is a reflection of this false creator God, if you will. It is this egoic split, this identity split, that is the culprit. Because the moment you recognize that you are more, suffering comes to a halt. There may still be pain, there may still be conditioning, surely there will. But you're not invested in a story to the same degree. Because you see that it is simply that. It is a story, it is a movie projected on a screen, and you are that screen itself, unaffected. And so, it is not about trying to avoid or get away from this prison system, this enslavement. It is not about freeing yourself from reincarnation. Because what you are doesn't require salvation, doesn't require being freed from, because it is already free from. It was never part of, it was never limited by, it is never refracted, because it is that pure light which you are. And so it is simply the mistake of the false identity to think that you need to free yourself from, and that it even requires freedom from. Because what this will do, once you put yourself on the search of becoming free, what you're saying then is that you're not already that. You're not already free. You are limited, and therefore you need to free yourself. But that idea you have of who you think you are can never be free. that idea of you needs to be seen through, needs to be seen for what it is. And once that is seen clearly in the light of what you are, it'll lose its magnetism, it'll lose its pull and gravitation. And that's not your doing. It is not an act of doing. It is simply the realization of who you are. And these beings that feed on humanity, they can't stand that you are. They can't stand the truth of your being. And that is why you see that throwing out demonic possessions, exorcising these beings is possible. It is a lost art, but it begins with you. It begins with you exorcising anything that is not true in you, that doesn't belong, that is not essential to your system. Because when you discard everything that can be removed, at some point you are left with that which cannot be removed, that which is ultimately true. And I think that is important to bring that forth, so that you don't end up in this new age trap of thinking that you need to rewire yourself, of doing shadow work, of healing your ancestral traumas, of thinking that you need to save yourself somehow, of thinking that there is some state to get to, some salvation to reach. No, none of that. It all has its place, sure, but it's secondary to the realization of what you are. It is fine to not desire to want to come back here. I think that is perfectly acceptable. But if you think that doing all these things, taking various actions, as opposed to simply marinating in your own being, is going to free you from coming back here, of being harvested over and over, you're mistaken. It is important to do the work of freeing yourself from this identity. And there are many ways to go about that. That is perhaps for another video. But to review your life, to see if the stories you tell yourself are really true, or if they're simply that, stories that you still hang on to. I think that is all for now. Check out the Discord link in the description. Join my modest community. Let's have a conversation and take care. Have a wonderful day.